So now for Chris's Chris is the pastor of Water Avenues Church. He also didn't provide a short bio because sometimes he forgets. But what are friends for? Rachel has made this zesty one-up for his behalf. Chris loves theology and has a heart for kittens of the furriest kind. He probably likes cheese burritos and sunsets, but definitely likes flannel shirts to get through those nippy Florida winters. Yes! He plays in a local band called the Castle Integral. Yes. Oh, sorry, I saw Castle. And if you want to talk Bible with him, he will probably show you how it speaks more about you saving yourself from yourself to live well in this life rather than God's instructions on how to avoid eternal damnation. If he tickles your fancy here, you can find him in his Florida flannel on Sundays at 11 a.m. Or catch him on stage yet again in a Florida flannel at the local bars doing emo rock band things. He's not that into prayer, but he is into you. Amen. It's beautiful. Thank you, Rachel.
I will now have Rachel be writing all of my bios.
Yeah.
About the chair. I wasn't trying to be higher than Jenica. I sat in the other chair and I just felt like I had disappeared, right? Like I'm used to standing up and all my energy was gone. I was like, no, I need to be able to like do this, and this, and this, right? So I got this chair. Speaking of chairs, look at all the extra ones we had to bring. This is a good turnout. It's very exciting. I'm happy for it. We're almost like outgrowing this space. It's too bad that we don't have a bigger space that we could use, but we'll have to talk about that. I'm really excited about tonight. When Rachel first said like sacred stories, I was like, oh, yeah. Right? We all deal in stories. Everything, everywhere is story. If I had to, well, you know what? Have you seen Stranger Than Fiction, the movie with Will Ferrell? I just saw it for the first time. Can you believe that? It's pretty old. Last night. Thank you, Dustra, for forcing us to do that. And I like how it's reality. Like, you don't know what's reality and what's not. But actually, all stories are reality in a sense, right?
Yep.
They build our world. So we have stories like myth, where they are these like founding stories of civilizations, right? Whether it's Marduk and Tiamat for ancient Babylon, or whether it's like I Shall Not Tell a Lie, George Washington, and America's founding fathers, right? Every civilization has a myth that they build their identity on that guides the course of that civilization. There's other kinds of stories too, like parables, the kinds of stories that Jesus spoke, for instance, that undo myth, that subvert, that maybe expose the antagonisms within mythic stories, right? Which is why Jesus always found himself getting into trouble, of course, because if you are upsetting the status quo, it will eventually come back to bite you by the powerful. So when Rachel said, tell a story, I said, well, like what kind of story? She said, a sacred story. I was like, well, what kind of sacred story? Because if you know anything about the Bible, it's like 80% stories. So I'm kind of lucky I could just pick any of them. She said, I don't know, whatever you want. Well, how do I tell it? What kind of story is this? Is it like a sermon? Is it like what do you want me to do here? She's like, just tell it like you're talking to your kids around a campfire. And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm going to be talking to adults. So I'm not going to be like, and then he said, right? No. And we're not really around a campfire. But I think I got the gist of it. So I'm going to tell you one single story. It's an ancient story. It was first written down about 2,500 years ago. But it describes events that occurred around 3,000 years ago. It's an ancient Hebrew story. You could find it in the Bible. My story of it will be synthesizing it with another story and paraphrasing and embellishing. If you do go and look it up and you disagree with my embellishments, I'd love for you to have a conversation about it with me. It'd be fun. I think it's faithful to the idea, though. We should definitely have a conversation about Jesus being a shaman. That would be fun.
Yeah.
And what else did I want to comment on? Oh, it's okay. Let me get into my story. There was once a prophet named Elisha, an ancient prophet of Israel. Now, the prophets were people who were those who were supposed to have the word of God for the people. The idea of the prophet specifically was that they would speak to the rulers of the nation of Israel. Because see, the role of the prophet was to speak truth to power. The role of the prophet was to call out, to point out where rulers had forsaken what was right for the people and sought out their own gain. The prophets would start to speak when justice, peace, equity, and care for the weakest members of the community had gone by the wayside. And since the word of the prophet was so crucial to the life of the nation, kings would sometimes surround themselves with prophets who would just tell them what they wanted to hear. I think we know how that goes as well. And it was no different for Elisha. In his time, the king and queen, whose names were Ahab and Jezebel, had forsaken what was right for the people to pursue their own gain. At one point, Ahab, the king, who obviously would have been extremely wealthy, decides he wants a vineyard for himself. Well, the problem was it was owned by someone else, a family whose only means of survival was this vineyard. His wife Jezebel says, "You're the king, just take it." They have the man murdered, and they take his land. This is the kind of ruling family that Elisha had to deal with. Jezebel was no Elisha fan. She surrounded herself with false prophets. That is, prophets who only told her what she wanted to hear, not what she needed to hear. And as Elisha began to speak against Ahab and Jezebel, he began to come under fire. Jezebel wanted to have him killed. And so Elisha, of course, was very afraid, becomes depressed, eventually flees into the wilderness. He's doubting whether anything he does actually matters. He's wondering if he should just give up. And at one point, he actually cries out to Yahweh, his God, and he says, "I've had enough. Just take my life now." And he falls into a deep sleep. Well, an angel comes and shakes him, wakes him up. A messenger from Yahweh, and says, "Get up and eat." And he doesn't want to do it at first. He's like, "I don't want to eat. I just want to sleep here all day." But the angel shakes him again. Elisha wakes up and sees that the angel's prepared a fire. It's baking bread over it. He says again, "You need to eat because you have a long journey ahead of you." And so Elisha eats, and he makes his way 40 miles to a mountain, Mount Horeb. It's called the Mountain of God. This was the same mountain where Moses saw a bush on fire, but not consumed. The same mountain where the name Yahweh was first used by the Hebrew people. And so Elisha's here at this historical, sacred, holy place. And he says, "I'm here." Suddenly he hears a voice. It's Yahweh's voice. The voice says, "What are you doing here, Elisha?" Elisha says, "I've been zealous for your ways. I've worked hard. I've been faithful to your justice, but injustice still spreads. The true prophets are being killed at the hands of the king and the queen. I'm the only one left, and now they want to kill me too." So Yahweh says, "Go and stand up on the mountain. Climb up that holy place, because I am about to pass by. You get to see me. You get to feel my presence. You get to find the comfort that comes from the weight and gravity of who I am. You can find courage and power to continue on." So Elisha heads up the mountain. And when he gets to the top of the mountain, he hears a mighty rushing wind. And he remembers the stories of his ancestors. How a great rushing wind blew over the primordial waters, taking chaos and bringing order from it, separating them so that dry land could emerge. He remembers again how after the great flood, God's breath of wind moved the waters and allowed for the flourishing of life. So this must be it. This is God, Elisha thinks. But Yahweh was not in the wind. And then after the wind, there was a mighty earthquake. And Elisha calls to mind again the ancient stories of his ancestors where the earth shook and a great cavern opened up to swallow those who stood against the good of the community. And he remembers when Mount Sinai shook and thundered as Moses went up to the top to receive the divine law. So this must be it, Elisha thinks. God's presence. But Yahweh was not in the earthquake. And then a raging fire swept in front of Elisha. And Elisha, again, remembered the stories of his ancestors. When on the way on this very mountain, Moses saw a bush that was burning, where the divine name was spoken. And then he remembers the stories of the journeys through the wilderness, when Israel is leaving slavery behind and coming to a land of freedom and possibility, led by a pillar of fire. And so this must be it. But Yahweh was not in the fire. And then, after the fire, silence. The sound of nothing. That eerie feeling is afforded to us on rare occasions of hearing our very own hearts beat. Just silence. And Elisha met his God. Whatever you hear in that story so far, take with you. It's yours. But perhaps we are to hear that what we needed was always in front of us, waiting for us if we simply allow ourselves the quiet of silence to see it. Perhaps in this season of music and lights and festivities and extra social events and invitations to give to charities and expectations of families, we can listen for God's voice in the freeing space of silence and nothingness. And perhaps we are to assume that the flashy, the dramatic, the grandiose, the complex are not, in fact, vocations of divine life, as we had once thought they were. Perhaps all we are left with is our own silence.